Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday Apocryphal Podcast, your one-stop shop for everything Friday Apocryphal and podcast. And boy, do we have a show for you today. Today we are covering the Wisdom of Solomon, chapters 16 through 19.
And we're finishing the Wisdom of Solomon.
We are.
It's going to be all over. It's all over now.
And you know what? I wish it was on a little bit of a more exciting note, because this is more plague stuff.
Well, we do have a little bit of exciting news. We've received our commentaries on Ezekiel.
Yes, we have. So they are in two parts. I'm not going to even bother lifting the other one because they're like, the covers are like falling apart. I guess I could take them off. But these are pretty old. And I was looking through some of the references and citations, and I'm pretty sure this is like before the time of this.
And by the way, what a name.
Oh, the dude's name?
Walther Zimmerly.
Walther Zimmerly.
Yes, very interesting name.
Oh, hey, Walther.
So
You weren't made fun
before I
incessantly?
reveal when this was written. Okay, so there was a German edition that was published 10 years before this English translation.
Oh, that makes sense.
All right.
Walther.
Yeah. So I am going to let the people try to figure out what year they think either one was published.
Yep, okay.
It's old. And in fact, because it's old, I think will definitely be referencing more than just this, and concentrating more on the other newer ones, because this
we
is
also
before,
have Eerdmans.
Yeah. I mean, we have plenty of commentaries here, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have no shortage of commentaries, but usually, Hermenia stuff is like the more in-depth stuff, which is great and all, but because of the time period, it might be lacking in some things because of the tides of scholarship at the time,
and probably there's some archaeological stuff that it doesn't have.
Yeah, exactly. So there's going to be some stuff that, this will be the supplementary one this time. That's a little biblical scholarship joke, because it's the supplementary hypothesis.
Oh.
I'm hilarious.
You're so funny, Lawrence. You should be a stand-up comedian.
Why don't you stand up?
Remember when you tried to be a stand-up comedian?
I didn't.
I remember when you were making...
I told a joke.
You had whole videos where you
that was bad.
I made fun of you for that, remember? I made my own spoof of it. That dog of mine, I made bad jokes.
I don't that was supposed to be spoofing me. I just thought that was...
Yes, it was.
Okay,
I have no interest in being a stand-up comedian.
No, but when you say, "Oh, that dog of mine," like that's
where
just
I stood up in front of the curtain for the nihilist thing, the joke. You don't remember the joke?
Oh no, I mean I remember the jokes you were making for.
Yeah, it's because I thought you wanted to be a stand-up comic.
No, I don't think that's why you're making those. I think because you wanted to make some bad jokes on purpose. I think it had nothing to do with the fact that I used to make those kinds of videos.
Sure, Lawrence.
Okay.
Well, anyways, today we are covering the last chapters of the Wisdom of Solomon. And
excited to get into
what year?
It. Yeah, so the original was published in 1969, and then the English translation, of course, in 79.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so it's pretty old.
Maybe I should say I was doing a bad parody of you.
Mm-hmm. You can say whatever you want.
I don't think making fun of is the right word.
Yeah, well, this Wisdom of Solomon was printed in some year.
Yeah, in some year.
1979.
Oh, wow. Incredible.
What a year for biblical scholarship.
Actually, though, like no joke, like the 70s were pretty big years for biblical scholarship.
All right. Well, I have the Anchor Bible version of the Wisdom of Solomon with commentary by David Winston.
I have Eerdmans' commentary on the Bible, as well as the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary, Volume 6.
All right.
And those are going to be the ones that we'll be reading from today. And we also ordered Judith, a commentary on Judith in translation. and it should be arriving today.
All right. Well, this chapter 16, is broken up into 3 sections in this book.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that there's a reason for that.
What are the sections?
The sections are second antithesis, Egyptians hunger through animal plague, but Israel enjoys exotic quail food.
Oh, my God. Okay, that's
Fun name.
quite a section there.
The second section is third antithesis, Egyptians slain by locusts and flies, but Israel survives a serpent attack through the bronze serpent, symbol of salvation, which we briefly talked about on Sunday, I think. What a coincidence. And the third section for this chapter is fourth antithesis, Egyptians plagued by thunderstorms, but Israel fed by a rain of manna.
Okay, so that is definitely different from the divisions here, but I don't know. We'll go with it.
The point being that we are covering plagues.
Yeah, I love plagues.
You guys are going to get covered in plagues?
They're so great.
Well, you know what? Perfect timing. There's one that's just going around.
There's a ton of them. This thing keeps mutating.
Yeah, there's a different plague like every 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Like we had SARS and the Ebola thing.
Yeah,
and
Zika.
Swine flu.
Isn't that SARS? No.
Zika?
No.
No?
Swine flu is separate.
Yeah.
Swine
Bird flu is separate.
Yeah, but those didn't go to the
Pandemic.
Yeah, they didn't go to that level.
And like the coronavirus, the swine flu also had a vaccine produced, and it also had a bunch of anti-vaxxers who were freaking out about it.
Right.
Yeah. What wonderful times we live in.
I remember swine flu. That happened when we were in high school, right?
Yeah.
It's a while ago.
Yeah, like a decade ago, maybe even more.
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
We're old.
Maybe?
We've, us in high school would consider us old. No.
Yeah, I'd say so.
No, me in high school thought old was like past 65.
Yeah.
Well, I hung out with old people unwillingly.
That doesn't sound great.
Yeah, we've been going on for like 8 minutes now, and we haven't even gotten into the reading. So
There's a
get
reading
to it. I'll start on chapter 16. And this section is only 4 verses long.
Yeah. This. Oh wait, hold on. Maybe this is broken up into. This is dumb. Okay. Sorry. Go on. This is broken up weirdly.
Okay. Chapter 16. Therefore, they were duly chastised by similar creatures and tormented by swarms of beasts. Now, you remember in the previous chapter, they were talking about the horrors of worshiping beasts as the Egyptians do.
Yeah.
Or did.
And
I don't know if there's any modern Egyptians who worship the old Egyptian gods.
I have no idea. Although it's important to remember that this section resumes the second contrast, which was abandoned at 11:15 through 16. And chapters 15, 18 through 19 has prepared the way for the transition from the 2 excursus back to the comparison contrast structure.
Okay. In lieu of such punishment, you exhibited kindness to your people and prepared for the satisfaction of their fierce craving, an exotic delicacy of quail food. So
It's exotic.
Yeah. So
I mean, I've never had quail
No, it's the
or
food.
quail food.
Yeah, there you go.
I haven't had either.
yeah. So that those others, though desiring food, might turn away even from their necessary craving.
Oh, hold on. No, yeah. In response to the Israelites' hunger. Finish the verse.
Might turn away even from their necessary craving through the hideousness of the creatures sent against them, while your people, only briefly made to want, might partake of an exotic dish.
Okay, so in response to the Israelites' hunger, God provides them with quails. The author is following episodes from the narrative of the Israelites in the desert from Exodus 16, 1 through 13, and from Numbers 11, 4 through 35. In both sources, the meager signs of food and water in the desert contrast sharply with the abundance of food in Egypt. The people complain, they demand food, and they are given the extraordinary gift of manna and quails.
Yeah, wonderful. For it was necessary that an inexorable famine overtake the oppressors, but for your people only to be shown how their enemies were tortured. So that's the end of this section. The author has adapted the biblical version of this event to serve his own peculiar exegesis by omitting all mention of the people's murmuring and gluttony and God's furious anger, which culminated in the destruction of many of them, a characteristic feature of encomiastic writing. What is that? Encomiastic.
I don't know.
New word, everybody.
Although it's also important to note that the author has censored out all mention of the people's rebelliousness, which is associated in Exodus 16, 1 through 21, and Numbers 11.
So that's the end of that
Yeah,
section.
I guess that's the grumblings, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but there's more interesting commentary on here in the next section, which I'll get into now. Even when the terrible fury of beasts came upon them, and they were perishing through the bites of tortuous serpents, your anger did not abide to the end. Only for a while were they thrown into disarray as a warning, possessing as they did a symbol of your salvation to remind them of the commandment of your law. For whoever turned towards it was saved not by the sight beheld,
I guess,
but through you, the Savior of all. So this symbol of your salvation is the bronze serpent from Numbers 21:9.
Mm-hmm.
The Masoretic reads symbolon, which is reminiscent of Philo, where the serpent of Eve, or pleasure, is described as symbolon anthropo. F.H. Coulson, however, suggests the reading epibolon in that passage. Philo similarly interprets the serpent of Moses as a symbol of steadfast endurance, which explains, he says, why it is represented as being made of very strong material like brass. Quote, he then who has looked with fixed gaze on the form of patient endurance, even though he should perchance have been previously bitten by the wiles of pleasure, cannot but live, for whereas pleasure menaces the soul with inevitable death, self-control holds out to it health and safety for life, end quote.
And the negative, not by the thing beheld, betrays an element of embarrassment at the apparently apotropaic function of the bronze serpent in Numbers. And as with the incident of the quails, any reference to the complaints which triggered the plague of serpents, Numbers 21:5, is carefully glossed over.
Yes. Also, was not saved by the sight beheld. The author seeks to replace the principle of homeopathic magic, which appears to be operative in Numbers 21, 8 through 9, with a spiritual conception. We find a similar interpretation in M. Rosh Hashanah 3:8, quote, but could the serpent kill, or could the serpent keep alive? But rather, whenever Israel looked on high and subjected their heart to their Father in heaven, were they healed, but if not, they perished. It may be noted that...
So it's contrasting the works of God with the works of Egyptian magic.
Yes. It may be noted that the rabbis explained the punishment of the Israelites by means of serpents on the Talion principle, a conceit to which, as we have already seen, both they and the author of wisdom were equally attached. So, let's continue on. And by this, you convinced our foes that you are the one who delivers from every evil. For those men were slain by the bites of locusts and flies, and no remedy was found for their life, since they deserved to be punished by such creatures. But your sons were not overcome by the fangs of venom-spraying serpents, for your compassion came forth to their aid and healed them. For Philo, the reptiles are a symbol of poisonous passions.
Which verse are we on?
That was verse 10.
Okay.
11. It was to remind them of your oracles that they were sharply prodded and quickly delivered, so that they might not fall into a deep forgetfulness and become complacent through your kindness. For it was neither herb nor emollient that cured them, but your word, O Lord, that heals all. For you have the power of life and death. You lead down to the gates of Hades and bring back up again. Man indeed slays in his wickedness, but he does not bring back the expired life breath, nor release the soul embraced by death. And that's the end of that section.
I mean, I don't really have any more commentary on that.
Yeah. So,
I mean, it seems pretty straightforward, honestly.
Yeah, for the gates of Hades, see Tobit 13:2.
Yes, I remember that.
Yes, he leads down to Hades below the earth, but he delivers from the great abyss.
Yeah, still just general land of the dead.
Yes, which would be Sheol for the
Yes.
Jews, but this is written later.
Yes, lots. We were talking about this, when we first introduced the text. It was written in Greek, right? I'm pretty sure when we covered that.
I'm pretty sure.
I'm gonna go back and check, but yeah,
It's a very hero's journey-esque tale.
Yeah.
In general. Now we're in the third and final section of this chapter, which is 15 through 29. And I believe your commentary ended.
it actually is. The first two were under the same section, so it was just kind of weird. But yeah, the 15 through 29 is how it's separated here, so it makes sense.
Okay. But from your hand flight is impossible, for godless men who denied knowing you were scourged by the might of your arm, pursued by unusual downpours and relentless hail and thunderstorms, and utterly wasted by fire. This might be a reference to Korah.
And it's definitely about God's providence. Like he's you can't get away from God. He's God.
Mm.
So we find here the fourth contrast. This is driven by the comparison between the fire, which proves wholly destructive to the Egyptians, Exodus 9:24, and that which is wholly beneficial to the Israelites when used to bake the manna, Exodus 16:23.
Yeah, on this unusual downpours, Philo highlights this fact. Quote, "We must remember that Egypt is almost the only country, apart from those in southern latitudes, which is unvisited by one of the year's seasons, winter. Such was the condition of the land, enjoying springtime at midwinter, the seaboard enriched by only slight showers, while the parts above Memphis, where the royal palace of Egypt was, experienced no rainfall at all, when suddenly a complete change came over the air, and all the visitations which belonged to severe winter fell upon it in a body." Interesting facts about Egyptian weather patterns. Most incredible of all, in water which quenches everything, fire was the most dynamic force, for the cosmic order champions the righteous. At one moment, the flame was tempered, so that it might not burn up the beasts sent against the godless, the better for them to see and perceive that it was by God's judgment that they were pursued. At another, even amid the water, it flared up beyond the ordinary force of fire, to destroy the fruits of an unrighteous land.
So just to add a little bit more context, so some of the Stoic theories contemporary to the author of Wisdom regarding the transforming qualities of the elements are joined to the traditional theme of God's overriding providence in creation history.
So there's a noteworthy bit in here. The author appears to be assuming that the plagues of frogs, lice, flies, locusts, and hail were coterminous, thus contradicting the biblical narrative.
So, like, all at once?
Yeah.
Huh.
Although there were varying...
Although it couldn't it be just argued that, well, he's just putting it in one place as a summary?
Maybe. There's a little bit here. Although there were varying traditions concerning both the number and order of the plagues, we find Artapanus, for example, the number and order combining locusts, lice, and frogs into one plague. There's no known parallel to our author's particular scheme. So there were other traditions that combined plagues, but not like this. By contrast, you spoon-fed your people with angel food and unwearyingly furnished them from heaven bread already prepared, equivalent to every pleasure and suited to every taste.
I mean, that would be the manna, right?
Yeah, the angel food.
Which verse?
That is verse 20.
Okay, so this turn in the diptych contrasts the ravaging storms sent against Egypt with the special food provided to God's people in the desert. The author employs images of ease, abundance, and rest in association with the bread that came from heaven. They did not toil for it. It provided every pleasure suited to every taste. It was expressive of God's kindness to them. But yeah, it would just be the manna then.
Yeah, there are differing interpretations among rabbis. So Rabbi Akiba interprets this as being angel food. His colleague, Rabbi Ishmael, however, strongly objects to the view that angels partake of food and interprets lechem abirim as bread, which is absorbed by the 248 parts of the body.
Oh.
And this would... You know who wouldn't like this? The author of Jubilees, probably. Right? Because as it is in heaven.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the angels...
They were doing it first. They're eating. That's why we're eating. Well, maybe he didn't say that one specifically, but as you know, he said it about all the traditions, like they're circumcised too.
Yeah. But there's also traditions from rabbis on this term for it being suited to every taste. So Rabbi Joshua says, if one liked it baked, it would become baked for him. If one liked it cooked, it would become cooked for him. Rabbi Eliezer of Modim says, if one liked to eat something baked, he could taste in the manna the taste of any kind of baked things in the world. If one liked to eat something cooked, he could taste in it the taste of any dish in the world. Rabbi Akiba said, do not read lasad, cake, but sad, breast, i.e. just as the infant finds very many a flavor in the breast, so also did Israel find many a taste in the manna as long as they were eating it. Some there are who say lasad means a real demon. Even as the demon changes into many colors, so did the manna change into many tastes.
That's an interesting interpretation.
Huh.
So it's exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Almost by definition.
Yeah, like you taste it and it tastes however you want it to taste.
Pretty much.
That would be wonderful. For your sustenance displayed your sweetness toward your children, and serving the desire of him that tasted it, changed its nature in accordance with what anyone wished. But the snow and ice-like food endured fire and did not melt, that they might know that fire destroyed the fruits of their enemies, flaming in the hail and flashing in the storm. And this fire, again, had forgotten even its own power, in order that the righteous be fed. For creation, serving you its maker, tenses itself for punishment against the unrighteous, and slackens into benevolence on behalf of those who trust in you. Therefore, at that time too, changing into all things, it served your all-nurturing bounty in accordance with the wish of those who were in want, that your sons, whom you love, O Lord, might learn that it is not the varieties of fruit which nourish man, but that your word preserves those that trust in you. Wow. Nutritionists would probably take issue.
What verse is that?
That was verse 26 that I just finished.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was an adaptation of Deuteronomy 8:3. See also Philo, where he says, "You see that the soul is fed not with things of the earth that decay, but with such words as God shall have poured like rain out of that lofty and pure region of life, to which the prophet has given the title of heaven."
Yes, that is also cited in here.
For that which was not destroyed by fire melted straightway when warmed by a fleeting sunbeam, so that men might know that one must rise before the sun to give you thanks and make petition at the crack of dawn. So this is like a reference to the morning prayers.
Yeah, and it's very rabbinical in the way it's presented.
Yeah, Sirach and Beersheba reflect this. It says, the Watakin, i.e. those strong in their piety, used to finish the recital of the Shema with sunrise. Josephus said, before the sun is up, they, the Essenes, utter no word on mundane affairs, but offer to him certain prayers which have been handed down from their forefathers, as though entreating him to rise. Smith wrote a book, Essenes and Josephus, in the Philosophumena. Interesting word.
That's certainly an interesting word.
Yeah.
Looks over, goes, not gonna try.
Yeah, so this is like justification for the morning prayers, where they would have to do things before sunbeams would come down and melt things.
Yeah, so the mention of the rays of the sun melting the manna is an allusion to Exodus 16:21. Moses commanded that the manna be collected by the Israelites in the morning, according to the need of each person. For when the sun grew hot, the manna would melt. From this observation, the author draws forth an exhortation to observe the pious practice expressed in the Psalms. The faithful rise before the sun to express their prayer of thanksgiving or lament to God. And he cites a whole bunch of Psalms.
Cool. For the hope of the ungrateful will melt away like the winter's frost and drain off like water that goes to waste. And that is the end of chapter 16. If you're enjoying the stream so far, give us a like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, family, neighbors, people wandering through the desert.
Oh, yeah, especially people wandering through the desert. Perhaps they're lost.
Yeah.
So you know what? They need to be...
they need to give it some direction.
Exactly.
Through commentary.
This is the way you get direction.
Yeah, so...
I can think of no better way.
This next section...
Not GPS. Don't bother.
No, you don't need that.
Come on, man.
This next section goes 17:1 through 18:4. Mm-hmm. So... chapter 17 begins the fifth contrast. These are a series of contrasts, right? The bulk of this section of the text is given over to a rather imaginative and somewhat overblown description of the plague of darkness, Exodus 10:21 through 23. Naturally, the metaphorical connotations of darkness and light are fully exploited, especially in the climax reached at 18:4. After a summary statement introducing the section, verse 2 provides an exemplification of the principles stated in 11:6 about forgetfulness. In verse 3, it could be an allusion to the river Lethe in Hades, which we had a previous reference to the gates of Hades.
Yeah, and there's more on that I want to hit on when you're done with the part that you were reading.
Yeah, the connection between darkness, death, and Hades is explicit in 17:14 and 21. So we will be getting into some Hades stuff.
Yeah, so definitely the Greek seeping in here. It has been pointed out that the author was undoubtedly influenced by the literary genre known as katabasis. So Kata means down. So this is apparently translated as descents into Hades. Our best surviving example is Virgil's Aeneid, Book 6, which includes a graphic description of the terror that paralyzed the guilty. The rabbis had similarly identified the darkness which plagued the Egyptians as coming from Gehenna. And of course, we talked a lot about Gehenna, right? That's where people would burn their kids in the fire, and that would, the Valley of Ben Hinnom.
I was just going to say that as well.
Yeah,
Then I would say they perform Moloch or Moloch.
Yeah, if that was in fact an actual ritual. Mm. So it's it's very, very interesting stuff with Gehenna.
Yeah, now there is some textual stuff that I'm going to note right off the bat.
I love textual stuff.
So the fourth diptych contrasts the plague of darkness that engulfed the Egyptians during the ninth plague with the light that accompanied the Israelites in the desert. This diptych shows the author's imaginative, interpretive, and poetic skills at their highest level. The source from Exodus regarding the ninth plague is brief indeed, Exodus 10:21 through 23. Yet the fourth diptych, which is inspired by it, is of considerable length. The passage contains a varied vocabulary, with more than 50 words occurring only in this unit within the entire book.
Wow!
Yeah, some words...
I couldn't write 50 words.
Yeah, the author combines several literary and stylistic features that betray a complex style of Alexandrian writing. Often it is difficult to recognize or appreciate these features in translation. Hebrew does not make extensive use of adjectives, but the author employs the Greek technique of using adjectival phrases throughout the diptych. Nouns are employed as qualities.
Just so everyone knows, I hate translating those.
Yeah.
Where adjectives are used as nouns. It's the worst.
Yeah.
It's not the worst. There's worse in Greek, but it's horrible. That's what I'm trying to say.
Metaphors abound throughout the passage. Use is made of 7-part linked series of images of terror in verses 18 through 19, which is reminiscent of the 6-part chain syllogism of the Sorites employed in 6:17 through 20. In addition, the relative brevity of the description of the ninth plague in Exodus invites the author to explore the symbolism and psychological drama of the terror of darkness. The entrance into the symbolism and drama of the fear caused by the heavy darkness parallels the author's entrance into the reasoning process and confession of the wicked in the first part of the book. The two passages are made parallel by the concentration of the dramatic result of terror and fear. The author may very well have been familiar with the literary genre known as descents into Hades, which at one point attempted to portray the terror and fear of those who are burdened with guilt. So might get a little Dante-esque.
Oh, love it. All right, so chapter 17.
Yeah.
Great and inexplicable are your judgments. Therefore did untrained minds go astray. For though lawless men thought to lord it over a holy people, themselves shackled by darkness and captives of the long night, they lay locked in under the roofs, fugitives from eternal providence. So even, when they're the ones in control in a more physical way, I'm guessing that they're going for spiritually, these people are held back, right? The Egyptians, of course.
Yeah. Well, they can't partake in any of the good things that God sends. Right?
Yeah, and the long night. So cross-reference Exodus 10:22. Thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. And then also Philo. What else could it seem but a single night of great length, equivalent to 3 days and the same number of nights? Some rabbis further exaggerated the length of the darkness. There were 7 days of darkness. How so? During the first 3 days, whoever was seated and wished to stand who wished to stand up could do so, and vice versa. And concerning these 3 days, it said, thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt. Okay. That's a really weird statement. Either way, people exaggerated the length of these days. There's also 6 days. It was for a very long time. It felt like forever is what they're going for.
All right. There's this theme of powerlessness with the Egyptians that's going to pop up throughout this chapter. In 14a, the word powerless appears, but it's ironic. It's the Egyptians' self-generated fears which hold them prisoner.
I see.
And it notes here that darkness and the powerlessness of its inhabitants are principal characteristics of Sheol in the Old Testament. So you might remember that
I remember Sheol, yeah.
Yeah, when we were reading Psalms, there were quite a few that talked about how those who are in Sheol can't even offer praise to God.
Yeah, they can't really do anything. They're just kind of there. I don't even know if we got to the questions of like, do they experience anything? They can't really do anything. They're useless.
Now in Enoch, they do experience things.
Yeah.
Because there are different pits that they go into, and Abel is just walking around outside of them.
Yeah.
One of the pits was like
Glowing.
just darkness too.
Yeah.
And it had things chained up in it, remember?
Yeah, that was the it was not a pit. It was a separate area where the rebelling angels were being held for judgment.
That was the end of the universe, I think. Pretty much described as the end of the universe.
Yeah.
They were in like celestial prison. Thinking to remain unnoticed in their secret sins, cloaked by dark oblivion, they were scattered in fearful dismay and terrified by phantoms. I love all that. That was so cool. So in their secret sins, another example of the principle of Talion. He has a note on this and for 11.5. They sought to conceal their sins in darkness and were therefore plagued by darkness. I guess I can go back to 11.5. I'll do that in a second.
What verse was that?
That was verse 3.
Okay, so the idea of the Egyptians hiding or concealing their oppression, verse 3, recalls Adam and Eve hiding in the garden after their disobedience, Genesis 3:8. See also Cain's disclaimer of knowing the whereabouts of his brother in Genesis 4:9.
Well, hold on. Did it say that they were hiding, or did it say that God was looking for them in Genesis?
Let's check.
Yeah, Genesis 3:8. And let's see, the cross reference that he has was his note on 11.5, because I don't remember if we talked about the Talion, I think. I don't remember if we did that. So I am actually going to look back and check on note 11.
We might have noted it, but we didn't really go into detail about it. So Genesis 3:8, and they heard the sound of the Lord God walking about the garden in the evening breeze, and the human and his woman hid from the Lord.
They did hide. Okay.
Yes, so they did hide.
Okay. I see. That's all right. Yeah, I mean, I took a quick peek there on Talion, and I don't see it at all, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it.
Okay.
Continuing on here. Cloaked by darkness, first attested in the comic poet Antiphanes, that's the 4th century BCE, and occurs again later in Philo. All right. The specific word for being cloaked by dark oblivion. So that's the first time that's a test. So the first time it's attested is in Antiphanes, and then it occurs again later. I don't know why they had to note that.
Talion may refer to an eye for an eye.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is like the just desserts kind of
Gotcha.
thing.
Yep, just deserts.
By phantoms in Dalma is used in Jeremiah 27:39, in the Septuagint in the sense of idol, but is first attested here in the sense of appearance or hallucination. All right, so this is closer to the demon thing. So by indalmoi, that's a plural, he probably meant the deceptive images or appearances of wisdom brought forward by philosophers. That's interesting.
Mm.
And he's referring there to Lucian, I think. Yeah, I think he's referring there to Lucian's writings.
Oh.
But yeah, I guess just hallucinations is what they're talking about here. Because when it's dark, you know what you do? And when it's all low light, you hallucinate. Sometimes you might. When I had to look in a black mirror for an hour, I saw some things.
Well, that was because it was a demon.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
The demon that we summoned.
Yeah, that did nothing.
Yeah.
Other than you hallucinate.
Other than make me hallucinate. Yeah.
And still can't bend trees.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
You got ripped off.
Let me know when you finish verse 10.
Okay. For even the cranny that confined them did not shield them from fear, but terrifying noises crashed all around them, and gloomy, grim-faced apparitions appeared. No fire had force enough to give them light, nor did the brightly blazing stars avail to illuminate that hideous darkness. So it's very, very dark. So dark that light cannot penetrate through it.
Yeah. Continue.
Only a terrifying, self-kindled flaming mass opened a path of light for them. But terrified when the sight was no longer visible, they considered what they had seen more terrible than ever. That's an interesting one. Verse 6 there.
Yeah.
The meaning of this verse is unclear.
Okay.
Goodrick, 1913, followed a lapide, gives the likely meaning, quote, every now and then an electric flash lit up the darkness and showed the Egyptians the spectral forms of objects for a moment. Okay, I guess if it's like lightning, you kind of see...
You get the after flash. Your eyes like imprint the image.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's a spectral form, but I guess if you stare at a bright light for a while, you get it too.
The forms of the objects for a moment. When the flash ceased, they exaggerated in the darkness the things they had for an instant beheld. Okay.
So there is commentary in here, but it's going to make more sense after verse 10.
Okay. So they considered what they had seen more terrible than ever. And it was just this kind of blinding flash, a self-kindled flaming mass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Their inner fear is described by the author as a self-kindled fire, which emphasizes their personal responsibility for their punishment.
Maybe.
Or ball lightning.
Yeah, perhaps. Their magical shams proved ineffectual, and their pretension to wisdom was contemptuously unmasked. For they who were pledged to drive out terror and tumult from sick souls were themselves diseased with a ridiculous timorousness. Wow, okay. For even if nothing disturbing alarmed them, they were panicked by the prowling of beasts and the hissing of reptiles, and perished stricken by convulsions, and refusing so much as to look upon the dark haze from which there was no escape. That is the end of verse 10.
So, first, the idea that the magic art and wisdom of the Egyptians was humbled with their failure to dispel the darkness depends on a contrast between the first few plagues and the later ones. The Egyptian magicians were able to match the signs and wonders of the first two plagues of blood and frogs, Exodus 7:22 and 8:7. But during the third plague, that of gnats, the magicians failed to reproduce the signs of Moses and Aaron and admitted that the finger of God was present, Exodus 8, 18 through 19. The magicians themselves would become helplessly covered with boils in the sixth plague, Exodus 9:11. Now, Eerdmans comments that in verse 6, the word pir, fire, might retain its ancient Homeric meaning of funeral pyre, thus presaging the death of the magicians in verse 10, and maybe even the eternal darkness and flames of Hades. Since verse 5 has stated that ordinary fire gave off no light, this fire must be of a supernatural phenomenon. 17:7 probably alludes to the confounding of the Egyptian magicians in Exodus 9:11. 17:10a is a problem, since the Exodus narrative does not record the death of these magicians or indeed anyone during the Plague of Darkness. However, Josephus has a parallel tradition. The difficulty could be obviated by taking the word perished idiomatically, dying of fright. The word powerless, which occurs later, recalls themes that we've already talked about.
So I'm guessing then that the best way to describe this verse and the imagery that we're seeing here, especially with verse 6, would be that let's go with the whole funeral pyre thing. Like if they see one of their magicians, one of their priests dying, that will terrify them.
Yeah, and if it's a funeral pyre thing,
yeah,
then it would be like, well, they're all in this darkness, and the only thing that they can see is brief glimpses of death.
Or they can just see like their last hope going away.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that would make more sense than ball lightning. So, or you know the whole kind of flash imprint thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, let's continue on here. I just finished verse 10. For wickedness, self-condemned, testifies to its innate cowardice, and when anguished by conscience, always increases its pain. Yeah, I suppose if you know that you're doing a wrong thing, you're hurt by that.
Yeah, it says here, the punishing fear is brought into moral perspective. It is the result of wickedness which is condemned by its own testimony of cowardice. It is compared to the burden of conscience that exaggerates the difficulties at hand. Fear is defined as the abrogation of reason.
Yeah, that's the very next verse here.
Yes. Fear
is nothing but the abandonment of reason's aid. That sounds like one of those motivational quotes, you know?
Yeah, it does. So fear is defined as the abrogation of reason, which prefers the stupor of not knowing the cause of punishment. Where exactly the author derives such reflections is unclear. The idea of the conscience is more at home in the Greek philosophical schools than in Hebrew thought. However, the reflection is consistent with the views that the author has enunciated throughout the work regarding the responsibility of wickedness and the positive function of reason. The idea that wickedness is condemned by its own testimony parallels the author's declaration regarding the fruit of the wicked, which will bear witness against the parents at the time of accounting, 4 through 6. The idea that wickedness gives up on reason and prefers ignorance contrasts well with the positive function of wisdom, which is the source of understanding and virtue. The philosophical currents of Hellenism, particularly of the moralists, such as the Epicureans and Stoics, gave considerable space to the anguish that a guilty conscience would exercise. The author of the Book of Wisdom appears to be arguing that the resulting fear and cowardice of the oppressing conscience prefers ignorance, which actually compounds the torment of the one plagued by guilt. Plutarch relates a similar idea, quote, but fear alone, lacking no less in boldness than in power to reason, keeps its irrationality impotent, helpless, and hopeless, end quote.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Just like ball lightning.
Fear is nothing but the abandonment of reason's aid, and the vanquished expectation within accounts its ignorance of greater concern than the cause through which its torment comes. But they, all through a night, in reality powerless. Yeah, there you go. In reality, powerless, inasmuch as it came upon them out of the recesses of the powerless infernal realm, entranced by a deep like sleep. That's some stuff to cover there. Powerless infernal realm. That's pretty cool. I like it.
So
Verse 14.
yes, it's referring to the state of being in Sheol, and the same sleep in 1714c.
Yeah, I just haven't heard it described in powerless infernal realm.
Yeah, it's probably the same sleep of the inhabitants of Hades, an implied comparison which is finally brought to the surface in verse 21.
Keep forgetting to change the quote of the day. I think the quote of the day, by the way, should be the one we just read. The one, actually, we can change that. Chris can actually change that.
Where?
I mean, on Nightbot, yeah. And yeah, I think it should be the motivational sounding one, at least in my opinion. Fear is nothing but the abandonment of reason's aid. I think that would be a good quote of the day, I suppose. We'll save it also for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Try that one more time by me.
Yeah. Fear is nothing but the abandonment of reason's aid.
You wrote nothing.
Oh, I mean, he's got it. Nothing but the abandonment of reason's aid. That's right. Never leave reason behind. There you go. Have no fear.
Yeah, what verse? What's the citation?
It is chapter 17, verse 12
of Wisdom of Solomon.
Yeah,
17:12.
Yeah. So that works. All right. But let's continue then, I suppose.
Yeah.
Entranced by a deep like sleep, we're now plagued by phantom monsters.
Yes, phantom monsters.
Yeah,
and this is something that's continued to pop up.
Phantoms, I like it.
These phantoms, these creations of the mind, which compound their suffering, right? So
now paralyzed by the betrayal. Oh, here's actually the one that maybe you're referencing here. By the betrayal of their own minds, for sudden and unexpected fear poured over them. Thus, whosoever fell down there was held bound, locked in a prison without bars. Farmer or shepherd or troubled laborer in the desert, he was overtaken and awaited the inescapable fate. For all were bound by one chain of darkness, whether it was a whistling wind, or the tuneful song of birds and spreading branches, or the cadence of violently onrushing water, or the harsh din of avalanching rocks, or the unseen racing of bounding animals, or the roar of savage beasts, or an echo reverberating from a hollow in the hills. It paralyzed them with terror.
So this concentration of poetic imagery.
Science bless you, because that's what atheists are supposed to say.
Oh, yes, Einstein be with you. This concentration of poetic imagery to convey the punishment of the wicked is reminiscent of the poetic imagery used by the wicked in the first part of the book. There, the author employed poetic imagery from nature to describe the transience and hopelessness of the wicked.
Yeah, I mean, the imagery there is just, no matter what happens, no matter what they experience, it's they're going to be very afraid by it.
Yeah.
Didn't matter what it was. For
the manna could taste however.
I suppose.
This can be fear generic.
For the whole world was illuminated with bright light and went about its tasks unhindered. Over them alone there stretched oppressive night, an image of the darkness which was to receive them. Yet they were to themselves more burdensome than darkness. So it was really, so even though they had this darkness over them, And it's actually kind of interesting that they're putting so much emphasis on that plague.
Yeah, so in verse 21, 20 through 21 is a deduction made from Exodus 10:23. Right? 17c seems to allude the even more serious moral and intellectual darkness accompanying the Egyptians. So the darkness is not just a literal darkness, but it's also their state of
their state of mind,
their state of mind, their lack of wisdom, their preference for ignorance,
like the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no more commentary on this, and that is actually the end of the chapter. And although these next few verses are from chapter 18, they are still considered as part of the section.
Well, give them to me.
Yeah, you know what? I will. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And because that is the end of the chapter, I hope you are all enjoying the stream so far. Please make sure to drop a like, subscribe if you haven't, and liking really does help. Chatting really helps. Any kind of viewer engagement really helps the channel out.
Yeah.
Because then YouTube is like, hey, people are engaging with this content. Let's promote this content to keep them on the website longer. So, if you engage with the content, it goes well for us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and this commentary.
Yes, I see it. All right.
Starts there.
Great.
Okay. So, let's hop into it. Chapter 18. But for your holy ones, there was light supreme, the enemy who could hear their voices, though not discover their shapes, deemed them happy, because they had not suffered like themselves, and were thankful that they did not harm them, though wronged first, and begged the favor of their being parted. So they note here that the light supreme, Rabbi Eliezer says, when an Israelite...
Doesn't that kind of sound like the title of like a Tenacious D song?
Yeah, it also sounds like a Taco Bell
Also,
item.
yes.
But Rabbi Eliezer says, when an Israelite approached an Egyptian in order to borrow from him, the light accompanied him, and when he left, the light exited along with him.
Ooh, spooky.
Spooky.
Yeah, so while the dreadful darkness plagued Egypt, the righteous experienced a very great light.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reference to this light for Israel is the same as that mentioned in 1720.
Yeah. In contrast, you provided your people with a blazing pillar as a guide for their uncharted journey, a benign sun to accompany them on their glorious pilgrimage.
Interesting. A divine sun.
A benign sun.
Benign. Okay, I thought you said divine.
Yeah, we find a similar notion in MRS. I'm going to check what MRS is.
Go ahead. So let's see. Then in the wilderness, when the flaming pillar of fire accompanied their journey, let's see. The Greek behind. No. Never mind. That doesn't.
Mekilta de Rabbi Shimeon ben Yochai.
Okay.
So this is a rabbinical tract of some sort, where it says, commenting.
What verse was there on the sun? Sorry, what verse was that?
That was verse 3.
Verse 3. Okay.
Well, this rabbi, commenting on Exodus 13:21, that they might travel day and night, says, he compares their journeys by day to their journey by night, just as during their journey by night they suffered neither hunger nor thirst, and hot wind and sun did not strike them, Isaiah 49:10. So during their journey by day they suffered neither hunger nor thirst, and hot wind and sun did not strike them. So this is on the benign sun. Mm-hmm. Right? Even the sun didn't have the power to exhaust them.
Yeah. So this is just it's gonna do nothing to us.
Yeah. But well did those others deserve to be deprived of light and imprisoned in darkness, since they kept your sons captive through whom the imperishable light of the law was to be given to the world. They capitalize law. I assume it means Torah.
I would say so. So the theme of light is reintroduced through the image of the universality of the law. The imprisoned people were the ones through whom the light of the law was to be given to the world. The author interprets the gift of the law as a light not only for Israel, but also for the world. And I think we kind of got this kind of imagery when we talked about wisdom before, right? Mm-hmm. This understanding of the universality of the law follows that of Isaiah and Micah. Quote, all nations shall stream to the holy mountain, for out of Zion shall go forth instruction. That is both in Isaiah 2:2-3 and Micah 4:1-4, I suppose. Maybe that's just the idea, or I don't remember if that's an exact quotation. Philo likewise stressed the universal purpose of the law by describing it as a law for the world. Earlier, the author of Wisdom described the wicked as not walking in the light of justice. The light of the law will illuminate the paths of truth.
All right. Also, both in Jewish Hellenistic and in rabbinic literature, we find an attempt to interpret Israel's acceptance of the Torah as including the obligation to spread Torah's teaching to the Gentile nations. Thus, we read in the Testament of Levi, 14:4, quote, that if ye be darkened through transgressions, what therefore will all the Gentiles do living in blindness? Yea, ye shall bring a curse upon our race, because the light of the law, which was given to lighten every man, this ye desire to destroy by teaching commandments contrary to the ordinance of God. Also, in other parts, other literature, they echo the same idea. It's most interesting to observe Philo's reformulation of the biblical doctrine of election under the impact of his ideal of philanthropia, or humanity, rooted as that was in universalistic conception of man. At every possible opportunity, Philo emphasized the universal aspects of Jewish particularism. The Jews are indeed the nation dearest of all to God, but it has received the gift of priesthood and prophecy on behalf of all mankind. So the Sabbath for Philo becomes a festival of the universe and belongs to all people as the birthday of the world. Israel stands out as a model for all other peoples, quote, not for its own glory, but for the benefit of the beholders, for to gaze continuously upon noble models imprints their likeness in souls, which are not entirely hardened and strong, end quote. So, yeah.
All right, so that was verse 4, right?
Yeah, that was the end of the section. Now we're getting into the second section, which is the rest of chapter 18.
Yep. Yeah, so this the fifth and final diptych contrasts the death of the Egyptians with the extraordinary deliverances of the Israelites. So, more of the same, I suppose, but this time it's a different plague.
Yes. When they resolved to slay the infant children of your holy ones, though one child had been exposed and saved, you bereaved them of the multitude of their children for their discomfiture, and destroyed them as one in the violent waters. That night was made known in advance to our fathers, so that having sure knowledge of the nature of the plighted compacts in which they trusted, they might be cheered.
Yes, so the events alluded to here are the killing of the Hebrew male children, the rescue of Moses, the slaughter of the Egyptian firstborn, and the drowning of Pharaoh's army in the sea. Mm-hmm. That was the waters one.
Yes. Your people expected the deliverance of the righteous and the destruction of their enemies. For by the same means whereby you punished our antagonists, you summoned us to your side and glorified us. For secretly did the devout children of virtuous folk make sacrifice, and with one mind set forth the divine law that the holy ones should share alike in both blessings and dangers. while already raising a chant of the praises of their fathers. But the discordant cry of their enemies echoed in response, and the pitiable sound of lamentation for their children was spread abroad. Slave and master were punished together with the same penalty. Commoner and king suffered a like fate. United by a common death, all had corpses past counting. For the living were not even sufficient to bury the dead, since in a single moment their most precious offspring had perished. Wholly incredulous, thanks to their magical enchantments at the destruction of their firstborn, they acknowledged your people to be God's son. That's an interesting verse.
Which verse was that?
That was verse 13.
Okay, yeah. So the particular wording the author employs to describe the release of God's people after the experience of the 10th plague is reminiscent of the speech of the wicked. The oppressors acknowledge the just to be God's child, verse 13. And actually, does it give you the Greek word for it, for son?
It does not.
Okay. Because there would be one that you can use for son, and then another one that you could use for child, but you can use a masculine form of child, which would mean son, but it really depends on the word. So the author, yeah, but that's pretty much the whole thing. But it's meant to, of course, parallel the Egyptians' firstborn sons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're finally past the darkness.
Well, in 2 Maccabees, the Jews are called sons of heaven in the presence of the persecuting Syrian king. So,
all right.
Yeah. This is not something that's totally original, too.
Yeah, I mean, we're, the different epithets that are used for Israel. Daughter is used, wife was used last time. Son is also used. So, take that the way you want. But those are all epithets that are used.
Now, there's some interesting bits in these upcoming verses. While all things were enveloped in peaceful silence and night was midway through her swift course, your all-powerful Logos out of heavens from the royal throne leaped like a relentless warrior into the midst of the land marked for destruction, bearing your unambiguous decree as a sharp sword. Standing, it filled all things with death. It touched the heavens, yet stood poised upon the earth.
What verses were those?
That was verses 14 through 16.
Okay. So quite a lot there to take out.
And you remember,
of course, Logos.
Yeah, you recall in the New Testament that Jesus is not come to bring peace, but a sword. Yeah, which might be a reference here, but it says.
Well, the whole thing it really depends on the author's view of eschatology at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So the parallel between the judgment of death in the fifth diptych and the judgment against the wicked in the first part of the book continues with the description of the destroyer from Exodus 12:23. The destroyer is described as God's all-powerful word, of course, Logos, and as a stern warrior. Lots of Revelation imagery here, actually. Stretching from heaven to earth, who wields a sharp sword, filling all things with death. Wickedness undergoes a judgment of cosmic proportions in the first part of the book, just as the oppressors of the holy ones meet their judgment of death in the final part.
So there's extensive commentary here.
I'm sure there is.
I'm going to read some of it, not all of it, but leaped like a relentless warrior. So prior to that, they mentioned the Logos. The description is very similar to Sophia, in that both are all-powerful, descend from the heavenly throne, and carry out God's judgments.
Yeah, but this is I don't remember Sophia being described in this. I mean, I know that in a sword way.
Sophia is described as all-powerful in 7:23, descending from the heavenly throne in 9:4, 10, 17, and carried out God's commandments in 7:21 and 8:4.
Yes, but I don't remember anything about it like a sword.
Right. That's different. But this is where the Greek parallels come in.
All right.
So this is pretty extensive, but I'm gonna.
Oh, we're gonna be talking about like defending angels and stuff. I forget what they're called.
We're gonna talk about Athena.
Athena. Okay.
Yes, leaped like a relentless warrior. Athena, the personification of Phronesis, is similarly described in the hymn to Athena 5-9. Quote, "From his awful head wise Zeus himself bare her arrayed in warlike arms of flashing gold. But Athena sprang quickly from the immortal head and stood before Zeus, shaking a sharp spear." For the Stoic allegorization of Athena's birth, there are various references. Pseudo-Clementine Homilies 6-8, we're told that the ether is a ceaseless palpitation which begets intelligence and is called on that account Pallas, quote, "and this is artistic wisdom by which the ethereal artificer wrought out the whole world," end quote. The Stoics also tried to connect Athena with the conception of immortality, explaining Athena as Athanatos. A whole catalog of poetic descriptions.
That's actually cool. Okay, so describing Athena as Athanatos.
Yeah, deathless, right?
Yeah, it would be deathless because Thanatos is death and then the A.
Yeah. A whole catalog of poetic descriptions of Athena's birth from the head of Zeus, including her leaping, was believed to underlie her epithet Pallas and her armor. It can be found in a bunch of different things. The imagery of leaping or springing forth recurs in the Gnostic writings. In the system of Simon Magus, first thought or wisdom or Holy Spirit is described as leaping forth from God.
Didn't you talk about that in a video once?
I might have mentioned some things about Gnostics.
I thought it was in the Hermes Trismegistus video you talked about Simon Magus, no? Maybe it was in the Christian demonology one?
It might have been.
Okay.
It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah. In other sources, Logos leaps like a flame from the moist nature up toward the light. So this leaping, this warrior stance is very Greek and somewhat Gnostic.
Okay. Fair enough. I mean, it would definitely be more from the Greek.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
But it was a very common Greek motif with Athena, which is the point.
Yeah.
For the sharp sword, according to Orphic tradition, Athena springs from the head of Zeus, gleaming with his arms a brazen glory to behold, and becomes the accomplisher of his will. Philo employs the fiery sword of the cherubim as a symbol of the Logos. And Hebrews 4:12, for the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword. There's also the sword of Dardanus, a formula employing 7 archangels. There's also other references to the sword of Moses, and for saying it filled all things with death. The author of Jubilees 49:2 ascribes the slaying of the firstborn to all the powers of Mastema, where Ezekiel, the tragedian, ascribes it to a fearful angel. So yeah, there's a lot on this.
Yeah, I'm sure that sounds like it.
And for touching the heavens, yet stood poised upon the earth, the author is employing a well-known Homeric image. We read in Iliad 4:443, she, Discord, plants her head in the heaven while her feet tread on the earth. This was imitated by Virgil in Aeneid 4:177. She, rumor, mounts up to the heaven and walks the ground with head hidden in the clouds. We find similar image in the Testament of Orpheus 33-34. God is firmly set in brazen heaven on his golden throne and plants his feet upon the earth. Very likely, 1 Chronicles 21:16 was also in our author's mind. Quote, David saw the angel of the Lord standing between the earth and the heaven, having a drawn sword in his hand stretched out over Jerusalem.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a fun one. That was a fun one to talk about when we covered it.
Yeah, it was. So, very interesting verses here. At once nightmarish visions terrified them, and unexpected fears beset them. And one here, another there, flung down half dead, made known the cause of his dying. For the dreams that bewildered them indicated this in advance, so that they should not die without knowing the reason they suffered so terribly.
So even though you would assume that, Egyptians wouldn't have gotten accurate prophecies, right? Because they're not from Yahweh. Now they are basically seeing the future with this
dream vision.
With this, of course, dream visions. They're seeing the future this way, which does align with how Egyptians did magic, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
It's all part of divination, I should say. So that does make sense. But now their own divination is used against them, just like it was with Joseph.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So interesting stuff there.
Yeah, and on this being half dead, we find the same notion in a midrash that says the firstborn received the death blow in the evening, struggled convulsively through the night, and died in the daytime.
Me too.
Yeah. The midrash is attempting to reconcile two apparently conflicting verses. Exodus 12:29 says, "In the middle of the night the Lord struck down all the firstborn." But Numbers 3:13 says, "On the day that I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt." So there's a little contradiction in the Bible thrown into the commentary here that you can make use of. But the righteous, too, were touched by an experience of death, and a mass slaughter took place in the wilderness, though the divine wrath did not long abide. For a blameless man pressed forward to fight as their companion, introducing the armor of his ministry, prayer and atoning incense. He withstood the wrath and set a limit to the disaster, showing that it was you whom he served. I'm assuming that this is a reference to...
What verse is that?
That was verse 20 through 21. So I'm looking, and a mass slaughter took place in the wilderness. See Numbers 17:6 through 15. But it doesn't say exactly. So if you would...
Sure. Okay, so Numbers 17:6 through 15.
Yeah, Numbers... Oh, hold on.
Yeah, you just said it.
Yeah, 17:6 through 15.
Yeah. I repeated it back to you.
Yeah.
All right. Numbers 17:6. And all the community of Israelites murmured on the next day against Moses and against Aaron, saying, You have put to death the Lord's people. And it happened when the community assembled against Moses and against Aaron that they turned to the tent of meeting, and look, the cloud had covered it, and the Lord's glory appeared. And Moses and Aaron with him came before the tent of meeting. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Lift yourself up from the midst of this community, and I will put an end to them in an instant. And they fell on their faces. And Moses said to Aaron, Take the fire pan and place fire upon it from the altar, and put in incense and carry it quickly to the community and atone for them. For the fury has gone out from before the Lord. The scourge has begun. And Aaron took as Moses had spoken. And he ran into the midst of the assembly, and look, the scourge had begun against the people. And he put in incense and atoned for the people, and he stood between the dead and the living, and the scourge was held back. And those who died by the scourge came to 14,700, besides those who died because of Korah. And Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the scourge was held back. So just during this mass slaughter by God.
This is a reference to the Korah heights.
Mm-hmm.
But also with the atoning incense, we have a reference to Nadab and Abihu. So it says the Israelites used to say, "This incense
are those the kids of one of the kings, right? That were priests." Maybe not priests, but they were. Were they sacrificed? Was that it?
See Leviticus 10:1 and Numbers 17:12.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Hold on. That's why I got it confused. Okay. So, yeah, I think they're the kids of the priests. I think. Okay. Yeah, Aaron's sons. That's right. And the reason that reminded me of the king stuff is because there was a king who offered his sons whose names were almost exactly identical. I remember covering it. I remember reading about that in one of the papers that I had to read for the golden calf video, because there was this like incredible amount of parallels between those two narratives, but between the not just the narratives themselves, but the characters in the Jeroboam's golden calves and the golden calf in Exodus. Those are incredibly similar, but it goes beyond just the narrative. It's also the characters and some of their lives as well, and the names of the sons and what happened to them is also one of them.
Yeah.
So that's why that was familiar.
So it says here, the Israelites used to say, this incense is but a means of punishment. It was this that killed Nadab and Abihu, for it is said, and Nadab and Abihu took it. Therefore, the people should know that it was really a means of atonement, as it is said in Numbers 17:12, and he put on the incense and made atonement for the people. So
yeah, and of course this is meant to stop the thing that God's doing. Like, he's like, hey, you got to atone, or this is going to continue.
Yeah. He overcame the divine anger not by bodily strength, nor by force of arms, but by word he subdued the chastiser, by recalling the oaths and covenants of the fathers. For when the dead already lay fallen upon one another in heaps, how many bodies does it?
Oh my God!
If you remove one body from the heap, is it no longer a heap? For when the dead already lay fallen upon one another in heaps, he interposed and checked the divine anger, cutting off its line of advance toward the living. On his full-length robe, there was a representation of the entire cosmos and the glories of the fathers upon his 4 rows of carved stones, and your splendor on the diadem upon his head. To these the destroyer gave way. These he feared, for the single taste of his wrath was enough.
I mean, the robe, it's probably about, the lavish priestly garb, right?
Yeah, the term that's used for it is used alone in the Septuagint of the high priest's robes.
Yeah, there you go.
So the entire cosmos on the robe. Here we have a fleeting allusion to a notion which was especially widespread in Stoic and Cynic writings of the 1st century CE, namely, that the true temple is the universe itself. We read, for example, in the 4th epistle of
that's so like
out.
That's ad hoc, very ad hoc. Like, we have no temple anymore, so the temple is the universe itself. There we go, guys. Got it.
The high priest's long robe is, in its very complicated formulation, a likeness and copy of the universe. It is a circular garment of dark blue color throughout, a tunic with a full-length skirt, thus symbolizing the air, because the air is both naturally black and in a sense of a full-length robe stretching from the sublunar region above to the lowest recesses of the earth. Secondly, on this is set a piece of woven work in the shape of a breastplate, which symbolizes heaven. Then on the breast there are 12 precious stones of different colors, arranged in 4 rows of 3 each, set in this form on the model of the zodiac. For the zodiac, consisting of 12 signs, makes the 4 seasons of the year by giving 3 signs to each. This sacred vesture thus expresses the wish first that the high priest should have in evidence upon him an image of the all, that so by constantly contemplating it, he should render his own life worthy of the sum of things. Secondly, that in performing his holy office, he should have the whole universe as his fellow ministrant.
So, yeah, we talked about the priestly robe, obviously, when we were in Exodus. And this is an allusion to its magnificence, of course. So the ephod, which was placed on Aaron's priestly robe was to contain 2 onyx stones on which all the names of the sons of Israel were to be engraved. And then the idea that the robe contained a depiction of the world, verse 24, expresses the author's universalistic perception of God's rule.
And on the diadem, Beit Shabbos 63b, the ZIZ, it just says ZIZ, was a kind of golden plate 2 finger breadths abroad.
Is that supposed to be vis-a-vis? I don't know.
It's just ZIZ.
Oh, that's okay. That's just, it's all in capitals too. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
And it stretched round the forehead from ear to ear, and upon it was written in 2 lines, Yod-He above and Holy Lamed below, i.e. the divine name on the upper line and Holy Unto on the lower line. But Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Joseph, said, I saw it in the city of Rome, and Holy unto the Lord was written on 1 line. Philo interprets it as follows. Above the turban is the golden plate on which the graven shapes of 4 letters indicating, as we are told, the name of the self-existent are impressed, meaning that it is impossible for anything that is to subsist without invocation for him, for it is his goodness and gracious power which join and compact all things. So that is the end of chapter 18. And
we got one more chapter.
Chapter 19 is broken up into 4 sections.
Yeah. In this one it's also broken up as well. So they are all neatly divided for us. So here you go. Here's Erdman's. Yeah. So chapter 19. Unless you have any introductory things, I can just hop into the reading.
Go ahead.
Great.
Let me know when you finish verse 5.
All right. But the godless were hounded to the very end by pitiless anger, for God knew beforehand what they were yet to do. How after permitting their departure and urgently escorting your people out, they would change their purpose and pursue them. Yes, he did know that.
Mm-hmm.
He did know that. While they were still engaged in their mourning and stood lamenting beside the graves of the dead, they adopted another mad scheme and pursued as fugitives those whom they had beseeched to leave. For a condign fate drew them onto this. Is this supposed to be denouncement? I think this is a typo. Denouncement, and made them forget what had happened, so that they might fill in the one penalty still lacking to their torments, and that your people might accomplish an incredible journey, while their enemies might bring upon themselves a bizarre death.
So, in contrast to the temporary anger of God against the righteous, this is from the NIV commentary, the oppressors experience the pitiless anger of God to the end. The author alludes to Pharaoh's foolish decision to change his mind despite the release granted to the Israelites. The underlying dynamic here is that the oppressors' injustice is to reach completion in their punishment. This idea is consistent with the author's emphasis throughout the work that injustice bears the seeds of its own destruction. Very little is said regarding the final judgment against the oppressors. It is summarized in the concise image of a strange death. In contrast to the strange death of the oppressors, the righteous experienced an incredible journey. Now, Eerdmans comments that at first sight, the logic of 19:1 seems strange. The anger of God is pitiless because he knew in advance how the Egyptians would behave. They are therefore punished before they commit the crime. In this dialogue with 12:10, is this in dialogue with 12:10, or were the Egyptians given no opportunity to repent because God knew that this would be a waste of time?
Yeah,
or,
good theological question there.
Yeah. Or is 19:1b an attempt to make sense of both Exodus 3:19 and the theme of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart in the Exodus story? The coy phraseology of 19:4 makes the latter seem more likely. Here the author substitutes the philosophically difficult hardening theme for the more rational-sounding fate or necessity, though he still makes the latter the subject of active verbs. This term would resonate much better with an audience educated on Greek literature, and, like the use of the terms avenger and destroyer in 18:20 through 25, has the useful effect of distancing God from the action. Faced with the same theological dilemma, but against a Palestinian cultural background, the author of Jubilees makes Mastema, the chief of the evil spirits, an agent of the hardening of the Egyptian heart.
I remember that.
Yep. Both authors are trying to absolve God from actively causing evil.
Yeah, this Jubilees 48:12.
Yeah. So continue on.
Okay.
Let me know when you finish verse 12.
For the whole creation was fashioned over again in its original nature, submitting to your commands so that your children might be preserved unharmed. So it sounds like he's going to redo the flood thing.
Yeah.
Except he didn't really.
Not really.
So
He's going to flood the chariots after he opens the
I suppose.
area. I don't know.
One could see the cloud overshadowing the camp and the emergence of dry land out of what was before water. An unimpeded way out of the Red Sea, and a leafy plain in place of the violent surf, through which, sheltered by your hand, the whole nation passed after gazing at amazing marvels. Of course, the splitting of it.
Mm-hmm.
They were like horses at pasture. They skipped like lambs as they praised you, O Lord, their deliverer. That's the end of verse 9. That's also the end of the section, but it's definitely not the end of the chapter.
Yeah, neither of these two break it up like that. They break it up
Really?
into 6 through 12.
Interesting. Okay. There's really no commentary that we can add that much because
What they're talking about.
well, I mean, okay, so this is just the actual leaving of Egypt, crossing the Red Sea kind of thing. That's where we're at right now. So the leafy plain here. So probably a legendary elaboration of the biblical narrative. Gutman quoted from a Hebrew prayer for the last day of Passover.
Mm-hmm.
And
noted
he
in here too.
Yeah, and he rebuked the Red Sea, and the raging waters dried up so that they walked through abysses as on paved roads. On either side rose trees laden with fruit, and he caused sweet springs to gush out for them in the abyss, and perfume of sweet spices to spread its scent before them. So it takes this, it takes the crossing of the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, whichever way you prefer to look at it, because it really doesn't matter in this case. But they take it to a whole new level.
All right.
They're like you could basically live there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they so I'll read out the NIV here, but do let me know when you get to the end of verse 12. Anyway, it says here, the contrast with the strange death of the oppressors is dramatized through the extraordinary moment of deliverance at the Red Sea. The author harnesses the positive function of the cosmos to highlight the final moment of salvation for God's people. Creation itself was transformed in order to redress injustice. It is as if the crossing of the sea unhindered on a grassy plain summarizes succinctly both the punishments of the oppressors and all the acts of deliverance recounted in the diptychs. Just as the sea was the means of the ultimate judgment against the oppressors, so too is the sea the means of the ultimate deliverance of the righteous. The praise of God, expressed through the images of ranging horses and leaping lambs in verse 9, recalls the joy expressed for deliverance in the Song of Moses, Exodus 15:1 through 18, and in the Song of Miriam, Exodus 15:20 through 21. Psalm 114 employs the image of skipping rams and lambs to express the joy of creation at the deliverance of Israel. The comparison of the joyful righteous to ranging horses may be a contrast to the traditional image of the destruction of the horse and rider, Exodus 15:1. Isaiah speaks of Israel's passing through the depths like a horse in the desert. Isaiah 63:13.
You also see Psalm 114:4
Yes.
for the imagery.
In experiencing the extraordinary deliverance through the sea, the righteous remember the manner in which creation has come continuously to their aid against the unjust. Against the unrighteous, the earth produced gnats, and rivers spewed forth frogs instead of fish, recalling the third and second plagues. In favor of the righteous, a new kind of bird came from the sea to give them relief when they desired food. The creation of animals, as recounted in Genesis 1:20 through 25, undergoes a metamorphosis in the Exodus event in favor of the righteous.
I continue on at verse 10. They still recall their experiences during their sojourn in a foreign land, how instead of cattle, the earth brought forth lice, and instead of aquatic creatures, the river disgorged a swarm of frogs. Love that word, disgorged.
Yeah.
But later, they also witnessed a new mode of bird production. When driven by appetite, they demanded delicacies, and quails came up from the sea for their relief.
So
yeah, quails in the quails from the sea, quails in the Mediterranean area, in the Mediterranean area winter in Africa, and migrate northward in vast flocks in the spring. This is an exhausting flight and is done in stages. When the birds alight to refresh themselves, they are easily caught. Presumably, it was a cloud of migrating quails that came down on the Hebrew encampment. That was according to... so they're cross-referencing Aristotle here. But it's from McCullough. I don't know how to pronounce it. But the point is Aristotle, I guess, had this idea about they're migrating. That was the explanation for that.
So, verses 6 through 12 contrast the miraculous experience of God's people with the strange death of its foes. The text presents the events recounted in Exodus 14 as a kind of new creation, in which the current order of the world is reversed. It uses philosophically sounding language in 6a, as it has previously in 16:23 through 25, and as it does in more detail in verses 18 through 21. God reshapes anew the formless matter from which the world was created, interchanging the basic elements, three of which are mentioned in verse 7, to produce the desired result of keeping his children unharmed. The physical theory presupposed has been first formulated by Anaxagoras in the 5th century BC and had become commonplace of Hellenistic philosophy by the author's time. Philo has a similar explanation for these miracles. Dry land emerging in verse 7 alludes to Genesis 1:9 and reinforces the theme of miracles as exhibiting the same power as God used at creation. The grassy plain echoes Genesis 1:11 through 13.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading that, I definitely thought it was like this kind of new kind of Genesis. Like, I was definitely reading the creation stuff in there.
Yeah.
Continue on here, verse 13. On the sinners, however, punishments rained down, not unheralded by violent thunderbolts. Justly did they suffer from their own misdeeds, since they practiced such cruel hostility towards strangers. Others refused to welcome strangers who visited them, but these enslaved guests and benefactors. And that was not the sum of it. Indeed, their final reckoning is yet to come. For the former received strangers with hostility from the start, whereas the latter, after a festal welcome, oppressed with hard labor men who had already shared with them equal rights. But they were struck with blindness too, and they were as were those at the doors of the righteous man. When encompassed by an immense darkness, each went groping for his own doorway.
So, Eerdman's comments, on the surface, verses 13 through 17, contrast the behavior of the Sodomites and the Egyptians towards strangers to the detriment of the latter. But many scholars have seen beneath the surface an allusion to the poor relations between the Jews and their neighbors in the author's own time. The reference to the Jews having already shared the same rights in verse 16 is particularly evocative of the changed situations in which they found themselves after the Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BC. Verse 13a probably draws on Psalm 77, 17 through 20. And there's some references to Genesis in there. Now, the NIV commentary notes that this is a new argument for the just punishment of the oppressors. The author interprets the Israelites' sojourn in Egypt as there being strangers and guests who originally were welcome benefactors yet became enslaved. The Joseph story makes that pretty clear. The children of these strangers became benefactors of the Egyptians in the governorship of Joseph. They became enslaved, however, by the very people who had benefited from his services. The reference covers a large span of history. The book of Exodus recounts how after Jacob's family had multiplied and grown strong in Egypt, a Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. This Pharaoh set a policy in motion that treated the Hebrews as slaves. The guilt of the Egyptian oppressors is highlighted by the comparisons between those who did not welcome in the first place and those who welcome them only to enslave them. The author is alluding to the inhabitants of Sodom, who want to abuse the guests of Lot. The punishment of the inhabitants of Sodom became a paradigmatic motif of sin and punishment in Scripture. Often the comparison of a contemporary sin to that of Sodom is made in order to highlight the greater culpability of the contemporary generation. This greater seriousness and culpability of the sin of Egypt is exactly what the wisdom author wishes to emphasize by comparing Egypt to Sodom. If it is a great sin not to receive a stranger with hospitality, as in the case of the inhabitants of Sodom, so much greater is the sin of receiving strangers only to enslave them, as in the case of Egypt. Corresponding to the sins of both Sodom and Egypt is the punishment of darkness. The author draws a comparison between the forms of punishment for the sins of inhospitality and slavery. The Egyptians were stricken with the loss of sight in the 9th plague. The aggressors against Lot were struck by blindness so that they could not find the entrance to the door. Two details in the author's treatment of the hostility of Sodom and Egypt towards strangers possibly relate to the contemporary situations of the author. These details consist...
Yeah, that's the doors of the righteous man.
Yeah. These details consist of the theme of hospitality to strangers and the notice of someone's being enslaved who had shared the same rights as those who enslave him. Reference to the inhospitality of Egypt to the ancestors may be the author's reversal of the polemic levied against the Jews by contemporary pagans.
Yeah, I actually did want to kind of hit on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the hostility towards the strangers. So in styling the conduct of the Egyptians as misognesia, because that's supposed to be misogynia, okay, because that's how it's that's the letter. So then that's the word for hostility towards strangers.
Mm-hmm.
The author is reversing the very charge made against the Jews by his pagan contemporaries. Even the friendly Hecataeus of Abdera claimed that Moses introduced, quote, a form of life encouraging seclusion from humankind and a hatred of aliens, although he was prepared to explain it away as the result of their own expulsion from Egypt. There is a fragment from the 34th book of Diodorus' history, which details with the struggle between Antiochus VIII, Sidetes, and the Jews, 134 to 132 BCE, and which relates that the anti-Semitic advisors of the victorious Seleucid king suggested that he should storm Jerusalem and, quote, wipe out completely the race of the Jews, since they, above all nations, avoided dealings with any other people and looked upon all men as their enemies. And this is continuing on the quote. The quote is still going. This is not me saying this. This is the quote. They pointed out, too, that the ancestors of the Jews had been driven out of all Egypt as men who were impious and detested by the gods. Having organized the nation of the Jews, they made their hatred of mankind into a tradition, and on this account had introduced utterly outlandish laws, not to break bread with any other race, nor to show them any goodwill at all. They reminded him that Antiochus, called Epiphanes, on defeating the Jews in 169 BCE, had entered the innermost sanctuary of the god's temple. Finding there a marble statue of a heavily bearded man seated on an ass with a book in his hands, he supposed it to be an image of Moses, the man who had ordained for the Jews their misanthropic and lawless customs. So that is quite the quote.
There is detailing of this treatment of the Jews by the author's contemporaries, which I'll read out here.
Okay.
The reference to the Hebrews being reduced to slavery after having shared civil equal rights possibly alludes to the polemic for equal rights and citizenship that Alexandrian Jews waged under Roman rule. Originally, the Jews welcomed Roman authority, to the consternation of the Egyptian natives and the Greeks alike. According to Philo, Augustus confirmed the right for the Jewish community in Alexandria to maintain its autonomous status. Between the death of Augustus in 14 CE and the letter of Claudius in 41 through 54 CE to the Alexandrians, confirming the status quo, the Jewish community was in serious conflict with the Greek population in Alexandria. Not only was a special tax imposed on all non-Greek citizens by the Romans in 24 BCE, but also Emperor Caligula, 37 through 41 CE, demanded divine status for himself. Both burdens were rejected by the faithful within the Jewish community. This put them into conflict with the Greeks, who successfully barred those who were demanding access to the gymnasia from attending. Greek citizenship, Philo attaining Greek citizenship. Philo headed the delegation sent to Caligula to reestablish equal rights, but without success. Caligula's successor, Claudius, finally intervened to stop the arguments and mutual recrimination in Alexandria by imposing the status quo. It is possible that the wisdom author is not limiting the reference of sharing the same rights to the equal status enjoyed by the Hebrews under Joseph in ancient Egypt. The reference could equally apply to the autonomous status of the Jews in Ptolemaic Egypt, who then subsequently became the object of attack by an aggressive Hellenism.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
All right, continuing on here. I think we're at verse 18 now.
Yeah.
For as the notes of a psaltery vary the beat while holding to the melody, so were the elements transposed, as can be accurately inferred from the observation of what happened. So this is a metamorphosis is what they're looking at, transposed.
Mm-hmm. And they're comparing musical instruments to the elements.
Yeah.
Which, of course, were common in Greek schools of thought.
Mm-hmm. For land animals became aquatic, and things that swim migrated to the shore. Evolution. It says it right there, guys.
Yeah, it says it in the Wisdom of Solomon.
Oh, it's metamorphosis. Divine metamorphosis.
So fire retained its own force in the water, and water forgot its quenching properties. Conversely, flames did not waste the flesh of perishable creatures that walked among them, nor was the easily melted ice-like type of heavenly food dissolved. So I'm gonna, pull up some of these quotes here.
So the ice type food is the manna.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's, this is following the new creation.
So land animals became aquatic. Quote, and this is from, I don't know what this person's first name is, but the scholar's name is Greg. And it's spelled with two G's at the end. By passing through the waters, the Israelites momentarily obtained the powers of water dwellers. That was his quote. And then things that swim.
Animorphs.
There you go. The things that swim. The reference is to the plague of frogs. Cross-reference Philo. There we go. So yeah, we're still talking about the plagues, but they are but they're talking about it in the sense of how the elements have changed. I guess it's kind of like the shifting of the divine order, right? I would say so. And then what is this? The last verse here?
Yes.
Oh my God, we're on the very last verse. That's crazy.
Yes, and this last verse is directed to God as a hymn of praise.
Yes, it's called, just titled, Concluding Doxology. For in every way, O Lord, you exalted and glorified your people, and did not neglect to assist them in every time and place. That's just untrue. But concluding doxologies are common in Jewish religious literature. Let's see, we got Psalm 150, Sirach 51:30. Then we got some references to Maccabees and Tobit at the end of Tobit 14:15. Moreover, it was already a common practice in the Tanaitic age for a homily to end with words of consolation.
So I'll just read this last bit from Eerdmans. 18 through 22 form a fitting conclusion to the book, drawing together and summarizing elements from the later chapters and finishing with a concise statement of the theme of the major part of the book. The precise nature of the musical analogy is rendered uncertain by difficulties in the text. Most commentators can only make sense of the verse either by amending the text or by giving the Greek words used meanings that they do not have elsewhere. However, the general point being made is clearly the same as in verses 6 through 12. At its simplest level, the analogy may have been, as the same set of notes can produce different tunes depending on how they are combined, so God arranged the same elements in one way at creation, but in another at the miracle of the crossing of the Red Sea. 19a possibly refers to the Israelites, land animals, traversing the sea like fish. Verse 19a certainly refers back to verse 10 and the plague of frogs. So,
yeah, there we go.
There we go. And I've changed up the bookmarks here for Judith and
great, fantastic.
So, final thoughts on Wisdom of Solomon.
Wasn't Solomon. That's my thought. I'm going to say Suda Solomon is a decent but not great piece of wisdom literature. There are some pieces that I would say, sure, that could still apply. That's still wise.
It very closely follows those ideas in Job about people being deserving of their punishments and like Hammurabi, I think.
Sure. I think overall, I would say that, and it's very weird. It's very bouncy when it comes to themes and ideas.
Yeah.
So, like, we ended off talking about the Egyptians and the Exodus and stuff like that, but we had, like, sporadic notes from before when earlier we were talking about wisdom. We were talking about, like, origins of idolatry, stuff like that.
Yeah, it seems like it goes from talking about wisdom to this presentation of the Egyptians as like an archetypal lack of wisdom.
Right.
And that's a theme that kind of follows throughout the book. It starts off talking about these unjust, unwise people, and then like the whole last section of the book is just really focusing on, I guess, the most unjust and unwise people.
And I think for the time period, it would fit, especially at the end there where we were just talking about how, okay, so I think the author would have been like, okay, so here is what it means to be wise. Here's what it means to be wicked. And here's how the wicked came to be. And here's the archetype of the wicked. But then the reader would be like, oh, see, they're drawing that parallel between the worst wicked people, the most wicked people, and the wicked ones now. So that's kind of the purpose, I think, of the book then.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to compare the Egyptians to the Romans, right?
Or it would be to
or even the Greeks.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously different circumstances.
Absolutely. But it's the idea behind it is stop being dicks to us.
Yeah.
But although we've read some quotes that people thought that about the Jews, very bordering on a certain dictator I learned about.
Yeah, and
unheard of dictators.
Unheard of. But I think part of it, if it was being written as like a polemic against these taxes and such.
Well, I don't think this one would be necessarily on taxes, but it's
unfair treatment.
Yeah.
Right. It would make sense for all of the talk about manna in the desert and the quails and stuff, where it's like trying to convince people to remain as Jews.
Yeah.
Right? Even though they're being treated unjustly.
Sure. All right. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, that's final thoughts on Wisdom of Solomon.
I've read better.
Yeah, 7 out of 10. Maybe 6.
Yeah, 6 or 7 out of 10. Yeah,
6.5.
6.5 out of 10.
6.5. Yeah,
it's our group average is 6.5 because that's my pick.
Yeah. Fair enough.
All right.
Yeah, so next week we are going to be reading Judith.
Yeah, that book has not come in yet, but it's supposed to come in today.
And let me just flip Eerdmans open here. Judith is,
and I think the
16 chapters long.
Okay,
right.
not
so
very long.
We'll be spending like
a month and a half.
Yeah, 5 weeks or so.
Yeah, maybe a month,
maybe 4 weeks.
We'll see.
I mean, it's 16, so we could do 4 chapters per.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how when it comes in.
These 2-hour episodes are okay, except when you gotta go to the bathroom.
Except when you have to go to the bathroom.
That's pretty. Usually during the stream, I don't.
Yeah.
It's
and see, Ruben, he doesn't go to the bathroom. He ascends.
Yeah,
right.
I ascend.
He's never had to go.
Okay. As a holy man of God, I don't go to the bathroom.
If you guys enjoyed the stream, make sure to drop a like, subscribe. If you have not, liking really does help the channel. And also, we will be beginning Ezekiel on Sunday.
Yeah, Ezekiel, that's going to be fun. That's going to be like
it's going to be
multiple months.
It's going to be more fun than Laments. Let's be honest.
Laments was made quick for us because it's not long and we did the whole thing in one go.
Yeah. So, I mean, beyond that, we have a Patreon.
We do. And you know what? Someone won a shirt the other week. You could win a shirt if you become a patron. So you can become a patron. Yeah, consider becoming a patron.
And if you donate $50 or more a month,
yeah, or more, I suppose.
Yeah, you could give us $51. Then you can be on the show. We also have an Amazon wish list.
And there's a lot of great books on it. We will read them. We will then bring you the information. We read the books, so you don't have to. They will be on this table, perhaps, depending on what they are. But they will definitely be used as sources in some way.
Yeah, we got all sorts of stuff on there. Got a Septuagint Bible on there. I don't know if we have a Vulgate on there.
I think we do.
But if we don't, we'll add one, I guess.
I mean, whatever. So let's see what else we got. We also if you just want to get yourself a shirt, you could just go on Teespring.
Yeah.
They're available to you. You know what? We do have some great shirts. I think our producer Chris might pin a shirt to the chat. Which one are you gonna pick today? Let's see. That one? All right. Fine. Fair enough. I would have picked a different one, but okay.
Fair enough. We also have a donation drive going on. We're only like, I don't know, somewhere between $100 and $200 away.
Yeah, we're actually getting very close. So let's see. That's
like 500 almost.
Hold on. So we are about 200 away.
Yeah, and once we hit that goal, we'll be getting a Thetan meter. We'll be telling you about Scientology. We'll be telling you how the Thetan meter works. We'll see who the most clear is on our team here.
And then we'll force everyone to look really clear using some easy spoofs, perhaps.
Yeah, we'll have to test if we like throw dollars at it. It makes us more clear.
Oh yeah, that's a good. I'll throw some money at it, sure.
Yeah. So,
Facebook and Twitter, free to follow us on those platforms. All links are in the description. Sadly, Nightbot has not been posting it.
Yeah, Nightbot has been slacking.
Occasionally decides to go die.
I think Nightbot's busy in other streams.
Oh yeah, there's streams that are more important than us. So forgive Nightbot for prioritizing.
That's not even possible.
Yeah, I mean,
we're talking about the words of God here.
Right. We've done almost everything in this NIV commentary.
Yeah.
There's Daniel and the additions to Daniel that
sure.
we'll get to eventually. But I mean, I think
let's see what's
there's a bit on Bel and the Dragon and some shorter things in here which aren't on the cover of the book. It doesn't tell you that they're in there.
That would be the addition to Daniel.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
But it's a separate section. So, yeah, that's it. That's the show. I mean,
yeah, we got nothing else. Anything that we didn't mention
in the description below.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and where are all our likes? Give us likes. Okay. Like our show. Even if you dislike our show, like it.
Yeah, that's the spirit.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you on Sunday.